Okay, we've been in a series over the summer talking about power over, and we've looked at various things. We've looked at evil, creation, impurity, sickness, and I got the utter delight of speaking to you guys about scarcity. Brené Brown, who is one of my absolute loves in life, so I've got a few, she says scarcity is rooted in a culture of never enough. And it thrives on three things. It thrives on shame, it thrives on comparison, and it thrives on fear. And it can sound like an inner narrative that says, we're just not quite enough. Not successful enough, not smart enough, not loved enough, we don't have enough money, there's not enough time. Oh my word, the list can simply go on. And so what's the impact when we have this inner narrative going on for us is that we hustle and we strive and we measure against other people and we just try and prove that for goodness sake we are of course enough. And it can happen even when we're living a life of plenty. That there's this inner narrative going on that we're just quite enough, or there's an area within our lives that feels like a place of lack. And that we end up living life through a lens of lack. It shapes how we see ourselves, the decisions we make, and how we relate to other people. Lynn Twist, who's a global activist, says, scarcity is the great lie to which we end up believing. And she says that actually almost everybody begins their day in a place of scarcity. Because the majority of us wake up in the morning and think, I have not had enough sleep. And so you start your day from a place of scarcity, and it may feel really minor. But what she argues is that from that minor place that we begin our day, starts to have an impact, and it starts to build, and it starts to grow. So that by the time you go to bed, your mind is racing about all that you do not have, or the things that you did not accomplish in order to measure up. And scarcity, I think, doesn't just stay in our mind. I think it seeps into our hearts and it fuels our comparison, as I've said, our jealousy, even our greed and our shame. And as I've said, it's not just about resources. I think it's about a belief system that's then reinforced by culture and so often reinforced by our past and the things that we have already and experienced. And it's a mindset that can trigger all kinds of thinking. Maybe it's to do with financial pressure, the bills are piling up, the job insecurity, maybe it's relational stress, the fear of losing someone you love or simply not having a partner, maybe it's work, career and the competition and feeling replaceable, or maybe you keep going for that promotion and it just is not happening. Maybe it's time and energy and the constant pressure of the busyness of this flipping city. Maybe it's a life transition that you're currently in, or maybe it's simply part of your identity. I'm sure that all of us here have experienced times in which we felt that we're in a place of lack. About 10 years ago now, I'd started working here, a little bit more than that. And I'll be honest, I really love this church, and I've been here a long time now. But it was at the point in which I kind of trusted people, but I didn't fully. You know, when you're sort of working people out, who they are and what they do and all this kind of thing. And I certainly wasn't going to be telling them my deepest secrets at all. But the reality was I was in a lot of debt. And it's the kind of debt, and you will know this if you've experienced it or are experiencing it, when the letters turn up at your door and you feel physically sick that you might have to open them. And you start avoiding your phone for the phone calls that might be coming. And that kind of depth of fear that comes up. And each month I would worry about whether or not I'd actually make the end of the month my paycheck. Even though it should have absolutely been enough to get me through, the problem was that because the debt I had, the interest that I was paying off meant actually it often didn't mean that I got to the end of the month. And so each month I'd have this kind of panic and fear that was steeped inside of me, but I didn't feel I could talk about it. Life experiences and my childhood experience had definitely told me you do not talk about this sort of stuff. So I just didn't. But it got to a point when I knew I was going to have to say something. And I had heard stories of people in this church who had had experiences of similar to mine and that God had just given them money, wiped it off, or that they had been really well supported by people. And it got to a point I was sat in the office and I remember just thinking, I really don't know what I'm going to do. And the wonderful Sally came in and had a conversation with me and I just ended up telling her, you know, when it's something like pops out your mouth and you're like, it's out. Anyway, I got involved with CAP, who are Christians Against Poverty. Can I highly recommend them to you? I think they're phenomenal. And with them, I entered into a debt repayment plan. And each month, I would slowly pay off my debt. But more than that, and I'd say the more powerful thing was me, I actually told some people. I told my closest friends. And we would pray about, God, would you be in this? Would you show me your provision? I believe you're a God who provides for all of our needs. So would you show for me? And another friend of mine said to me at the time, you know, I think God is going to show you what it looks like to have a generous father. That's the lesson he's going to try and teach you. Not that God caused my debt, but I think he was trying to use it to teach me something because I was willing to that kind of operation or that experience happening. Anyway, at no point did I receive some outstanding gift of money to pay off the debt. It took me over a year. Month by month, I diligently paid off this debt. But I think what God did was show me, A, what it looks like to actually budget well. It wasn't a lesson I had learnt. but he showed me what it is to manage my resources well. But he showed me the provision and his abundant nature, primarily through people I know who live generous lives. And not because they have a massive abundance of things, but because they believe in a God who provides. I had the privilege of people like Lisa and Rich doing random things for me, showing up. I remember we went on holiday because they're like, we'll just take you. And me feeling completely uncomfortable. The truth is I still find it really hard to accept this sort of stuff because there's this little bit inside of me that says, you're just not quite worth that though. And that's the problem with scarcity. It sits inside of us and it feeds this place of lack in our narrative that says we don't quite have that. But what God did was demonstrate to me over and over again his abundant nature, because the opposite of scarcity is abundance. And abundance is about overflow, it's about plenty, and it's about living from this place that is more than enough. It doesn't mean we get everything we want. It means a deep security in God, the one who is abundant, the one who gives us his abundance presence, his love, his grace, his mercy, his generosity. So I think abundance is God's gift to us, but the way we live it out, the way we are called to live generous lives is how we live it out. Because I think that's when things change. When we live from a place of abundancy, we're free to live generously. And our reading tonight, our story tonight, in a moment Sasha's going to come and read it for us, is a moment where human lack, in a situation where all they can see is lack, there is divine abundance, where Jesus meets the real need and face of absolute limitation. And it doesn't just reveal his power, although my word it does. It shows us how he wants us to live and how he wants us to be with him. So Sasha's going to come and read our passage for us. It's from Mark 6, and it's Jesus feeds the 5,000.
Mark chapter 6, starting at verse 30. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "That would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much in bread and give it to them to eat?" "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." When they found out, they said, 5, and 2 fish. Then Jesus told them to make all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and 50s. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000.
Thank you. Oh, I really love the disciples, man. I don't know about you. They've been faithfully following Jesus. They've been doing miracles. They've seen Jesus do miracles. They've endured criticism. And even earlier in this chapter, they've then been sent out by Jesus to do the things that he has been doing. They have proclaimed repentance. They have drove out demons. They've healed the sick in his name. And now they've come back to Jesus to report all that they have done. All that they have done and taught. Notice the shift. The focus has moved from what God did through them to what they have accomplished. And this shift matters because when our confidence shifts to ourselves from God, and it becomes about what we have done, not what Jesus has done through us, it sets us up for a problem. And in this story, we see it play out. The disciples and Jesus, they're hungry, they're tired, and Jesus' plan is to take them to a remote place to rest, a solitary place. And the solitary place indicates a place of wilderness. And in Scripture, when we hear about wilderness and wilderness places, it is an indication that there's going to be an encounter with God. At the beginning of Mark's Gospel, in 1:4, it says John the Baptist called people into the wilderness. Then in 1:12, Jesus and Satan have their encounter in the wilderness. In Mark 1:35, Jesus withdraws to a solitary place, the wilderness place, in order to pray. The list is endless. Throughout Scripture, Old Testament and New Testament, there are places where encounters with God happen in the wilderness. So Jesus says to his disciples, let's go. We're going to rest. I've heard what's happened. We're going to rest. We'll have some food. You can be refilled by God. It's essentially what they're doing, and they go off to this place of wilderness. But as the story says, as they set off, the crowds recognize them. They run ahead of them. They know where they're going to be, and they enter the location. And Jesus sees the crowd, and he looks on them with compassion. Kind of no shock, right? For Jesus always looks on the crowd with compassion. He views them as lost sheep and teaches them as a shepherd. But the situation becomes dire. It's got late in the day. We've already read they haven't eaten. There's no 24-hour Tesco for them to pop to. People are hungry. Disciples are hungry. Tummies are rumbling. And I reckon the disciples are so aware of the problem. They think they're going off to a wilderness place with Jesus to be fed in multiple ways. But now they've got this crowd of people in front of them. It says there's 5,000 men, plus women and children. That's a lot of people in front of them who are hungry. And I reckon one or two of the disciples have started to get hangry. You know, you all have that colleague or friend that when you don't feed them snacks at the right time, they get hangry, right? I don't want to name no names, but we've got two. We've got Hannah Fairclough, we've got Lisa Titchener. And my word, you have to feed them at the right times just to keep them on the right path, right? They're so nice, but not if you don't feed them. So there's 5,000 people, plus women, plus men, the disciples, and they are hungry. Hungry. It's got late. The disciples, they're faithful, they're risk-taking. They've seen God do untold number of miracles. They themselves have gone out without food. When Jesus sent them out, he said, don't take food with you, for God will provide. This has just happened. They know God. They can trust in God. And yet, seemingly, they've forgotten all of that. And they were relying on themselves instead. And their first instinct is one of fear and limitation. They see a hungry crowd and not enough food, and they respond with a scarcity mindset. Send the people away. Come on, Jesus. We've seen your compassion. You've taught them already. It's time for them to go and get food. You can't keep them here. We too are hungry, Jesus. Also, Jesus, you must be hungry because you're fully human as well as being fully God. Fully human, that means you too. You must be hungry. We've taught them about the kingdom of God. Jesus, for goodness sake, send them away. But Jesus can't. You give them something to eat. Imagine being there. Imagine being one of the disciples. You are hungry. You're tired. You've just been doing kingdom work, for goodness sake. And maybe you're wondering why on earth these people who've turned up have not turned up prepared. Why didn't they bring lunch? Why haven't they got food? Why doesn't it become obvious to them to head off, feed themselves, go home? The disciples are acting like this hungry horde is not their problem, and technically, they're actually right. You see, in the time in which they lived, under the rule of King Herod, it was Herod's responsibility to manage the natural resources and ensure that the people had enough food. It was the king's responsibility to ensure his people ate. And we're not talking about a small number, we're talking about over 5,000 men, plus women, plus children. In fact, just before this story takes place, you can read about Herod's banquet, where there was an abundance of food. It was a party that was marked by all of the food, but also manipulating, scheming, foolish boasting, and ultimately the death of John the Baptist. And then the next thing in Mark's Gospel is this story, where we are faced with thousands of people who are hungry. And what is the response of Jesus? Compassion. Utter compassion. To the disciples' statement of sending them away, he says, you give them something to eat. You feed them. You care for my people. You demonstrate love towards my people. Jesus knows that the disciples know that God can do this. It's not a test. They've seen it firsthand. They've been involved. But how on earth are they going to feed all these hungry people? People are hungry, they're tired, they're in need of food and rest, and the disciples are just the same as them. You give them something to eat, says Jesus. And immediately, the scarcity script goes up a level. And that would take half a year's wages. The disciples are so focused on what they lack. Too many people and not enough resources. How often do we respond in the same way when we are faced with situations that feel impossible? And do we operate from a place of fear or from a place of relying on ourselves? Not enough money, not enough security, not enough time. We so easily fall back into our learnt scripts of who will indeed provide for us, who are we supposed to rely on, who will protect us. You see, scarcity blinds us to God's possibilities. But I want you to pay attention to what happens next, because I think the story shifts and the pace of the narrative changes. Jesus uses the situation not to berate the disciples, not to tell them off, not to shame them, but to include them. How many loaves do you have? Go and see. I think it's a statement filled with compassion. They bring back 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and they hand the food to Jesus. And then they arrange the groups into green pastures. Remember, these are people who knew of the Psalms. They would have known connotations of this, arrange them and sit them onto green pastures. Psalm 23 starts with, "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures." You see, with God, you lack nothing. He wants to give you rest. He wants you to know his abundance and his generosity. Remember, at the beginning of this story, Jesus looks on the crowd as if they are lost sheep without a shepherd. And he brings them into a place of green pastures to rest. And Jesus doesn't ignore the lack. Instead, he blesses it and multiplies it. He takes the food, he looks to heaven, he breaks it, and gives it back to the disciples to distribute. You see, abundance is found in surrender and not stockpiling. The 5 loaves and 2 fishes are handed over freely by a young boy, it tells us in the other Gospels. And this small offering, blessed by Jesus, feeds thousands upon thousands of people. But notice, Jesus doesn't multiply the bread until it's actually in his hands. The miracle doesn't happen whilst they cling on to what little they have. It happens when they release it to him. You see, abundance is not about how much you have. It's about whose hand it's in. Abundance is found in surrender, not in stockpiling. But let's go back to the story. When Jesus multiplies the loaves, what happens to it? Well, it says that everyone was satisfied. There were 12 baskets left over. We could have a debate about what these 12 baskets represent. Is it one each for the disciples? Is it 12 tribes of Israel? It's not relevant for what we're going to be talking about. So you see, God doesn't just do enough. He always works in the overflow. And when we trust his abundance, we too can live in an open-handed way. Because I think when we work from a place of fear, it closes our fists. But when we have faith, we can open our hand. And generosity flows from the conviction that with God there is always more than enough. When you believe that God's love for you is abundant, it will never run out. You can freely love others. When you know that God's forgiveness for you is in abundance, then I think you can truly forgive others. And the list goes on. But I think the thing is, there are cultural patterns in our society, which means that we end up being just like the disciples. It's why I love them so much. We are pressed into the mold of this world rather than that of the kingdom. I said at the very beginning, scarcity isn't just about lacking resources. It's about living life through the lens of lack. It shaped how we see ourselves, about how we make decisions, and how we relate to other people. And as this story demonstrates, I think it also defines our expectation of what we think God can do. And I wonder if you've lowered your expectation of God. Maybe so you're not disappointed. Have you found other ways to satisfy your needs and to find your security? I mentioned earlier that when I had been in debt, it had this profound impact on me. I just had this incredible level of shame around money. And I knew God. I knew God was a God of provision. I knew God loved me. The thing that was the crazy bit, right? I didn't question whether God loved me. I knew he loved me. Did question whether I was going to fight for me, though. Those two things were quite in contrast to each other. But I know God is my provider. But it doesn't mean that at times I don't fall back sometimes into thinking about it or holding on to my money or feeling scared and choosing not to be generous. And I don't think that means living in a foolish way. But I do think there are kingdom principles at play. There is a script, a scarcity script that me and God are consistently working on, and I would say it's true for all of us. Because God's greatest desire is to bring us into greater freedom and to bring true healing to our innermost depths of our soul. The thing about a scarcity mindset, I think, is that it doesn't happen like that. I think it slowly seeps in. A little bit, situations we're in, when life grinds us down, when we are praying about that relationship or that job, that healing, that promotion, and it doesn't quite seem like God is answering us. And we do keep bringing it to God, and God, where are you in these things? And I think that's when life grinds us down a little bit, and slowly, a scarcity attitude takes up space in our lives, and it becomes the place we operate from. So I want to take you back to what Jesus does with the crowd. Jesus looks upon the crowd and has compassion on them. He sees them as a good shepherd. He guides them to green pastures. He feeds them because he loves them. And it's also his response to the disciples. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. It's not a place of lack, but a place of rest. A place of space and safety and security. It's the opposite of scarcity. And it's because of Jesus that power of scarcity is broken in our lives. No longer do we need to live from a place of fear, of not having enough, but knowing that God is the one who's already provided and that he is more than enough. When scarcity says to you, you don't have enough, work harder, hold tighter, Jesus says, you lack nothing. Come and find your rest in me. You see, God is a God of abundance, and it isn't about having more stuff. I'm actually less convinced at the moment that it's even about material stuff. I think it's about the very seat of our soul knowing our security. It's about being led by him into a life that is spacious and free. One where his presence is enough for us. One where our worth, our value, our identity, and our sense and security of love comes from. Because that's true abundance. And it starts with trust. Trusting in God. Trusting that Jesus has already overcome and that in him we lack nothing. And so tonight, I think the invitation is really simple. Where are the places that you need to know rest? Where are the places that you are holding on tight to right now? Or even the prayers that you have prayed for a long time and Jesus does not appear to be showing up? Because what if tonight our prayer was, Jesus, would you strip away all that falsely satisfies us? Would you teach us to trust in your abundance? Would you show us how to rest in you? Would you be our shepherd? Would you show us again your love for us? Would you be enough for us? Because that's the offer from Jesus. It's not frantic, it's not fearful, but it is full of grace, full of peace, full of him. And I think that's the offer tonight. Why don't we stand?